She doesn't belong here.
She doesn't belong in that OR, and she knows it. The words sliced through the stillness of the hospital break room, sharp and casual, like someone cutting fabric with a scalpel. Danielle Brooks heard them. Of course she did. The door hadn't even finished closing behind her when Nina, one of the senior white nurses, made sure her voice rang loud enough to bounce off every stainless steel locker. Danielle didn't flinch. Not at the whispering, not at the smirks, not even at the way Haley, another nurse with a badge clipped slightly higher than her ego, glanced up and gave that look. The kind that judged her skin before it considered her skill. Danielle was used to this. Used to the way racism didn't need to shout when it could drip slowly like IV fluid. Quiet, constant, corrosive. She placed her thermos down on the bench, undid her scrub cap slowly, and said nothing. But she knew. They were talking about what happened yesterday in OR3, and what happened yesterday should have ended her career. Yesterday, 11:47 a.m. The patient's vitals had dropped mid-surgery, bleeding faster than predicted. The attending surgeon was shouting orders like gunfire, and someone dropped the vascular clamp. Not just any someone, Haley. But when the tray hit the floor and the blood kept rising, the eyes turned, not to the one who dropped it, but to Danielle. Where was the backup clamp? Was this sterilized correctly? Did you prep this tray, Brooks? Every voice layered onto Danielle's body like weight. Blame without proof, guilt without defense. She had triple-checked everything. Still, none of that mattered. To them, she wasn't the senior surgical assistant who'd worked 12-hour trauma shifts at Mercy Hill for 4 years. She was the black girl in the room when something went wrong, so of course she must have been the problem. Now, 24 hours later, Danielle stood in the same break room where whispers had become weapons. They thought she'd break, resign, disappear into another hospital, another department, another statistic. Instead, she poured coffee. Slowly. Calmly. Like she didn't hear Nina call her a diversity hire just 5 minutes ago. But inside she burned, because what they didn't know was that someone else had seen the footage. That same surgery had been recorded, archived like all high-risk procedures at Mercy Hill. And that footage didn't lie. It showed exactly who dropped the clamp. It showed who froze. And it showed Danielle, catching the chaos, holding the line, stabilizing the surgeon with calm precision while everyone else lost their heads. Danielle hadn't said a word to anyone since, but she didn't need to, because last night her badge had beeped at 2:13 a.m. Private message, one line. Meet me tomorrow at 1:15 p.m. outside OR2. Dr. Caldwell, Ethan Caldwell, Chief of Surgery, and the man every single nurse in that break room wanted to impress. It was now 12:59 p.m. Danielle stepped out of the break room in silence, her steps slow but unshakable. Her badge hung at her hip like a quiet reminder. Danielle Brooks, Senior Surgical Assistant, OR Division tenure, 4 years, disciplinary actions, 0 saves, 192. She could hear the break room behind her. She's seriously going down there? Bet she's begging to keep her job? She's gonna cry in 10 minutes, tops. Danielle said nothing, but her breath was steady. Her walk? Straight. Because what they didn't know was that she wouldn't be walking into that hallway alone. Have you ever been blamed just for being the one who didn't look like the rest? If you were Danielle, would you walk away or walk right back in? Stick around, because what's about to happen in OR2, no one saw coming. Mercy Hill Medical Center was pristine on the outside. Glass walls, steel beams, gardens perfectly trimmed with seasonal symmetry. A marble fountain gushed gently in the front courtyard, as if washing away the sins of the system it protected. But on the inside, it was a maze of egos, of whispers, of unspoken rules dressed in lab coats and clinical smiles, and somewhere between the anesthesiology wing and the trauma elevators, Danielle Brooks had learned that no matter how sterile the building looked, some things refused to be disinfected. Danielle wasn't new. 4 years in the OR wing meant she'd worked under the best and survived the worst. She had steady hands, sharper instincts, and the ability to predict a surgeon's next tool before they asked for it. But none of that showed on paper. What did show, at least to the rest of the staff, was that she was a black woman in scrubs, too composed, too competent, and too close to Dr. Ethan Caldwell. And that was a problem. For people like Nina Reyes and Haley Scott, that was unforgivable. They called it the Whisper Ward, the East Side hallway outside OR1, where staff gathered after high-stakes surgeries to gossip behind half-shut doors and espresso machines. It was here that Danielle's name floated like fog. Never spoken directly, always implied. Some people get promoted faster these days, huh? She's lucky to be on Dr. Caldwell's team at all. Did you hear how she got that shift? They didn't need to name her. Everyone knew who she was. Danielle tried to ignore it. But the racism wasn't always loud. Sometimes it looked like missing her name from the team briefing email. Sometimes it meant being left out of post-op debriefs. Other times, it was more surgical. Like when Nina accidentally removed Danielle's name from the supply request list, forcing her to delay a procedure. Or when Haley switched out her labeled sterile trays the morning of a critical cardiac bypass. It was always something small, always deniable, and always directed at the same person. But Danielle had learned to document everything. She wasn't here to be liked, she was here to be excellent. She came in before the lights in the surgical wing were even warm, reviewed every instrument tray, ran double checks on infection control protocols, and greeted patients like they were people, not procedures. Even when the environment tried to crush her, her discipline never cracked. But that didn't stop them from coming after her, especially after that day. That day, the trauma patient came in with a shattered pelvis and internal bleeding. Dr. Caldwell had taken over the case himself. Danielle was not originally on the surgical team, but a nurse called out sick last minute, and the charge nurse had rotated her in. Emergency override. She didn't hesitate. She scrubbed in, reviewed the imaging, and stepped into OR3 like she had 100 times before. It was chaos, bleeding too fast, pressure dropping. An artery tore mid-procedure. And that's when Haley dropped the clamp. It clattered across the sterile floor. Dr. Caldwell didn't shout. He snapped into action. "Backup clamp, now!" Danielle already had it in her hand. Seconds counted. She stepped forward and placed it, calmly, into the surgeon's palm. No fumble, no panic. They saved the patient, but afterward the whispers began. Was that her mistake? Shouldn't she have caught that? She's not ready for high-risk cases. Danielle filed the post-op report. Haley's name wasn't mentioned once. Her own, however, was listed 3 times, under tool management, tray prep, and potential contamination check. 3 strikes, no context. By the end of the shift, someone had submitted a recommendation for review. That night, Danielle didn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the dark ceiling of her tiny studio apartment above 36th and Jackson, wondering how many years of excellence could be undone by 30 seconds of bias. Then came the message. 2:13 a.m. Private internal system. From Caldwell, Ethan. Meet me tomorrow, 1:15 p.m., outside or 2. E. Danielle thought about canceling, thought about transferring, thought about quitting medicine altogether. But when she looked in the mirror that morning, still tired, hair pulled back, skin glowing not from sleep but from stubborn resilience. She remembered why she started. Her mother, a nurse, who never got promoted because she didn't fit the image. Her brother, who died in a waiting room while staff ignored him because they thought he was drug-seeking. Her patients, the ones who gripped her hand before going under, whispering, "Thank you for being here." She walked into Mercy Hill that day with her shoulders squared, not for revenge, not even for validation, but because truth had been caught on camera, and she was tired of apologizing for existing. What would you do if the system quietly erased your name while using your work? Next, Dr. Caldwell doesn't just stand beside Danielle, he puts his entire reputation on the line, for the first time in his career. The hallway outside OR 2 was unusually quiet for a Wednesday. Danielle stood at the far end, her badge clipped tightly to her scrubs, the hallway lights casting a sterile sheen on the polished floor. Every step she took echoed like a countdown. Every second ticking past 1:14 p.m. sounded louder in her chest. She wasn't here for revenge. She was here for the truth. When Dr. Ethan Caldwell appeared at the other end of the corridor, the air seemed to shift. He walked with purpose, not the hurried strides of a surgeon on call, but the steady, unwavering pace of a man who had already made his decision. And he wasn't alone. Behind him came Dr. Helena Ruiz, Chief of Internal Review, and behind her, 2 members of the Executive Medical Board. Danielle's throat tightened. This wasn't a private chat. This was war. Dr. Caldwell didn't waste time. "Let's make this quick," he said. OR 3 incident. Post-op report, video footage, staff conduct. Dr. Ruiz nodded curtly. "We're conducting an inquiry into procedural negligence. The report listed Miss Brooks under 3 points of potential failure." Danielle opened her mouth, but Ethan raised a hand, not to silence her, but to take the shot himself. "The report is wrong," he said flatly. The board members exchanged looks. Dr. Ruiz blinked. "Excuse me? You heard me. It's inaccurate, biased, and deliberately misleading." He handed over a tablet. "Surveillance footage, time-stamped. OR 3, Tuesday, 11:46, 12 a.m. Watch it." The video played. No sound, just clean HD clarity. Haley drops the clamp. Danielle reacts instantly. Dr. Caldwell nods as she hands him the backup. Calm. Precise. Professional. At 11:47:06, the bleeding slows. The procedure continues. Dr. Ruiz's face shifted. The footage didn't lie. Ethan didn't stop there. Check the tray logs. Danielle verified them twice. The missing instrument was never assigned to her. The sterilization record, already cleared by infection control, and Haley, who dropped the tool, was conveniently left out of the report. Silence fell over the group. Danielle stood still, watching. Not just the faces of the board, but Ethan. He wasn't reading from notes. He wasn't checking documents. He remembered every detail, because he had been paying attention all along. Then came the question. From Dr. Ruiz. "Dr. Caldwell, why are you stepping into this? You weren't the one who filed the incident report." Ethan didn't hesitate. "Because I've had enough." He turned toward Danielle. "This is one of the most competent surgical assistants I've worked with in my entire career. Her race, her background, her quietness, none of that excuses the way she's been treated." His voice dropped, but every word hit like a gavel. "And if this hospital cares more about protecting politics than protecting the truth, then maybe I need to rethink where I work." The hallway went dead silent. One of the board members cleared his throat. "There's no need to escalate," but Ethan cut him off. "I'm not escalating, I'm exposing." Danielle hadn't moved. Her heart pounded so loudly she was sure they could hear it. For years, she had fought in silence, kept her head down, chosen dignity over drama. And now, someone was finally speaking her truth. Out loud, in public, at risk to himself. That afternoon, the board ordered an immediate suspension of the report. An internal review of procedural bias was launched, and for the first time in Mercy Hill's history, anonymous staff behavior reviews were opened for submission. The whispers in the halls changed that day, not because Danielle demanded it, because the surgeon everyone respected refused to stay silent. But word travels faster than scalpel cuts in a hospital. By the time Danielle walked into the surgical lounge later that evening, every eye turned. Nina looked up from her tablet. Haley froze mid-step. Conversations dropped. Danielle didn't speak. She just walked to her locker, removed her surgical cap, and placed her badge down on the table like a challenge. And then she sat, calm, steady, like someone who had already won, without raising her voice. Behind her, a voice spoke. "She's still here?" It was Haley. Danielle didn't turn, but another voice snapped back before she could respond. "She's here because she earned it, unlike you." It was Ethan. He had walked in behind her, quiet but not unnoticed. He crossed the room and stood next to Danielle, arms crossed. "Anyone have a problem with that?" he asked. No one answered, and for the first time in a long time, Mercy Hill was quiet. If someone used their power to defend your dignity, would you let them, or push them away to protect yourself? Danielle wasn't used to being looked at like this. Not with admiration, not with jealousy, and certainly not with fear. For the past 4 years, she had been invisible by design. Quiet, precise, a ghost in the surgical wing who showed up before dawn and left long after the charts were filed. But now every glance she caught in the hallway was sharp and unfinished. People looked at her like a question they didn't want to ask, like a story they couldn't control anymore. In the break room the next morning, no one made a sound when she walked in. Not Nina, not Haley, not the 2 new interns who used to treat her like an errand runner. The coffee machine hissed in the background, the only thing brave enough to break the silence. Danielle poured herself a cup and sat at the edge of the bench, trying to steady her hands. Her badge now felt heavier than ever, not because of shame, but because everyone was finally reading it. That afternoon, she stepped into the patient recovery wing for post-op check-ins. She liked this part. No noise, no politics, just people healing. An elderly woman in 7B reached out with trembling fingers when Danielle checked her IV line. You're the one from the hallway," she said. "The doctor stood up for you." Danielle smiled softly. "I suppose he did." The woman squeezed her hand. "Good. Someone should have stood up for you sooner." Danielle didn't know what to say, so she just held her hand back, a little longer than necessary. By the end of the week, the support came in whispers. A post-it note on her locker, "You're not alone." A sterile tray perfectly prepped and labeled. This time, not by her. A short nod from Dr. Ruiz in the elevator, and the briefest of sentences. "We're watching things now, differently." But support was not the same as peace. Peace didn't show up at 3:17 a.m., when Danielle lay awake, staring at the cracked ceiling of her apartment, wondering if this was just the eye of the storm, wondering how long until they tried again. Until someone decided she'd gotten too much attention. Until her presence was once again seen as a threat. Because the truth was, she wasn't afraid of being hated. She was afraid of being tolerated. Tolerated until she slipped. Tolerated until she snapped. Tolerated just long enough to be blamed again. The next day, she found herself face to face with Dr. Caldwell outside the elevator. He looked different, exhausted, but also lighter somehow. "You okay?" he asked. Danielle hesitated. "I'm functioning," Ethan offered a half-smile. That's surgeon code for "I'm falling apart but refusing to admit it." She smirked despite herself. Then her voice dropped. "I'm not used to people fighting for me." "You shouldn't have to be," he said gently. "But I will, as long as it takes." There was a pause. fragile and unspoken, a moment not quite professional anymore. Danielle looked down. You do know they're going to keep talking, right? Ethan nodded. Let them talk. Well, what if it gets worse? He met her eyes. Then I'll speak louder. She didn't answer. But when the elevator dinged, she didn't step in. She stayed. With him, even if just for a moment. Later that evening, Danielle walked the hospital's rooftop garden. It was something she rarely had time for, but tonight felt different. The sky was a charcoal canvas brushed with lavender streaks. Below her, Mercy Hill glowed in a grid of cold, fluorescent light. Each room, a story, a pain, a fight. She sat on the bench in silence, the breeze cool against her skin. She didn't want to be a symbol. She just wanted to do her job. But maybe doing it right was already making her one. She pulled out her phone and opened her notes app. Typed one line. Don't mistake my silence for surrender. Some of us fight differently. She hit save, not to post, just to remember. Because if they came again, she wouldn't just survive them. She'd be ready. Have you ever felt supported but still scared? Would you trust people or keep your armor up? Danielle hadn't visited her childhood home in over a year. Not because she didn't want to, but because the memories there were heavy. And Mercy Hill had already given her more weight than she could carry. But after the confrontation with the board, the silence of the break room, and the way people started stepping just slightly aside when she walked down the hallway, she needed to go back, to remember who she was before the badge. The house was small, weathered, with paint peeling near the porch railings and wind chimes that never stopped clinking. But it was home. Her mother, Elaine Brooks, greeted her at the door like she hadn't aged a day. Same apron, same twist in her silver-streaked bun, same eyes that always seemed to know more than they said. Danielle didn't say much at first, just hugged her. Tight. They sat at the kitchen table like they always had. Tea, silence, and the sound of the past between them. And then softly, Elaine said, You've got that look again. Danielle blinked. What look? The one you had when that boy in 8th grade called you a quota. Danielle exhaled a short laugh, but it didn't reach her eyes. Didn't think you remembered. Elaine sipped her tea. Mothers remember everything. They sat in silence a little longer before Danielle finally spoke. Do you ever regret staying in nursing, Mama? Elaine didn't look surprised by the question. She put her cup down slowly. Every time I was overlooked for a promotion. Yes. Every time they called me Elaine, while the younger white nurse next to me got Miss Taylor, absolutely. But, she continued, eyes locking with Danielle's, every time a black girl walked into my ER and saw someone who looked like her wearing a badge, never. Danielle looked down. I feel like I'm always fighting, quietly, just to be allowed to work, not to lead, not to thrive, just to stay. Elaine reached over, took her hand. You know what you inherited from me? She asked. Danielle shook her head. Not just the job, not the badge, not the backbone. Elaine squeezed her daughter's hand. You inherited the storm. That night, Danielle stayed in her old room. Same quilt, same posters of Maya Angelou and Shirley Chisholm on the wall. She stared at the ceiling fan, listening to the soft creak of the house she once wanted to escape. She remembered sneaking into her mom's car as a child, hiding in the back seat so she could follow her to the hospital. She remembered watching her mother being dismissed, ignored, talked over. But she also remembered seeing the way patients looked at Elaine, like she was the only person who actually saw them. The next morning, Danielle woke early. Her mom was already in the backyard, tending to a patchy herb garden that refused to die, no matter how poor the soil or how bad the season. Danielle stepped outside and stood beside her. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Danielle asked, How did you not give up? Elaine didn't stop digging. I wanted to, she admitted. Plenty of times. But you don't plant seeds because you're guaranteed flowers. You plant them because someone has to try. Danielle looked at the stubborn basil stalk her mother was coaxing back to life. She thought of Mercy Hill, of Haley, of the board, of Ethan, of the patient in 7B who thanked her, and something inside her quietly began to stabilize. Back at the hospital 2 days later, Danielle entered the locker room just before shift change. This time she wasn't invisible. One of the newer interns, a South Asian girl named Priya, hesitated before approaching. "Danielle?" she asked softly. Danielle looked up. "Yeah?" Priya held out a small envelope. I wrote this after what happened. You don't have to read it now, but..." Danielle accepted the envelope, nodding. "Thank you." Priya flushed, embarrassed. You make me feel like it's okay to exist here. That it's not just them." Danielle didn't speak. She just pulled her surgical cap over her hair and offered a quiet, steady smile. Then she turned and walked to pre-op. Her stride was strong, not because she had won, but because she remembered why she stayed. "Who in your life taught you how to fight quietly? If you had to plant seeds today, what would you grow?" Danielle didn't come back to Mercy Hill to be the hero. She didn't walk the halls for applause. She didn't prep trays to be seen. She didn't review surgical logs at midnight hoping someone would call her brave. She came back because the work mattered. And she wasn't going to let a broken system drive her out of the very place her mother once dreamed she'd reach. But this time, she came back different. Not louder, not meaner, just clearer. 2 weeks had passed since the board confrontation. Since then, the post-op reporting process had been quietly restructured. Now every instrument log carried digital timestamps. Every tray handoff required double sign-off. Anonymous feedback lines were added to the internal system, one for reporting misconduct, the other for recognizing overlooked excellence. None of it was publicly attributed to Danielle, but people knew. They always know. She didn't hold meetings. She didn't call out Haley or Nina. She didn't write a manifesto on glass ceilings or microaggressions. What she did do, she led. By example. When a younger black assistant dropped a tray during prep, Danielle didn't flinch. She walked over, helped her pick up each item, and calmly explained how to triple-check placement to avoid contamination. When 2 interns whispered behind her back, she turned, smiled, and said, "If you have questions about the process, I'm happy to walk you through it." And when Dr. Caldwell asked her, quietly, if she'd consider applying to the new mentorship pilot, she didn't say no. She said, "Only if I get to choose the candidates." He nodded. He already knew she would. The mentorship program wasn't glamorous. It didn't come with a bonus. Just a small corner of the 3rd floor, 2 hours a week, and a rotating door of exhausted nursing assistants, surgical techs, and even janitorial staff who wanted to understand how to move forward without breaking. Danielle didn't teach ambition, she taught resilience, how to document without fear, how to protect yourself without hardening, how to recognize when silence was strength and when it was complicity. And maybe most importantly, how to make space without apologizing. It started small. One nurse corrected a colleague who kept mispronouncing a name. A patient service rep refused to laugh at a racially coded joke. An HR assistant flagged a suspicious shift pattern without waiting for permission. None of these things made headlines, but they made room, and room, Danielle realized, was all she ever really needed. One day, Ethan joined the mentorship circle. He didn't speak at first, just sat in the corner, listening. Danielle noticed him, of course, but didn't change her tone. She was walking a trainee through a situation. A manager had taken credit for her prep work during rounds. Danielle asked, "What would it look like to correct them publicly, without being labeled difficult?" The room was quiet. Then she answered her own question. "Start with clarity, not defensiveness. Facts before feelings. Say, I believe that information was from the prep sheet I submitted this morning. Happy to clarify if needed." Ethan's eyes didn't leave her once. After the session, he approached her in the hallway. "You were incredible in there." She shrugged. "It's just practice, survival practice." "No," he said. "It's leadership." Danielle didn't blush. She didn't deflect. She just nodded. Like someone finally called her what she had always known she was. That night, Danielle walked past the nurse's station and saw Haley typing alone. Their eyes met. For a moment, Haley looked like she might say something. An apology, maybe. Or an excuse. But Danielle didn't wait. She walked past. Not out of spite, not out of fear, but because she no longer needed the validation. She had already chosen what mattered. And it wasn't their acceptance, it was her legacy. Have you ever learned how to lead from the quiet? What does power look like when no one claps? It was supposed to be a routine procedure. Mitral valve repair, elderly patient, stable vitals. Lead surgeon, out with a sudden family emergency. Dr. Caldwell had two choices: delay the surgery or assign leadership. He looked at the room, then he looked at her. "Danielle," he said, "you're leading this one." Silence. Haley, standing near the anesthesia cart, blinked twice. "You mean she's assisting?" "No," Ethan replied. "She's running the table." Danielle's stomach didn't drop. Her hands didn't shake. Because in that moment, all the hours, all the scars, all the years spent being underestimated, clicked into place. This wasn't a favor. This was a recognition. She pulled her cap tighter, checked the tray one last time, and said only 3 words. "Let's begin prep." The OR buzzed with that quiet hum of urgency. Not panic, not chaos, just focused readiness. Danielle scanned every corner. Monitor placements, suction lines, clamp orders. She had prepped this surgery 3 times before. Never as lead, but always as backbone. Now it was hers. She didn't speak much. She didn't have to. One eyebrow raised toward a junior tech who forgot their gloves, corrected instantly. One nod to the circulator nurse for repositioning. Understood immediately. Control didn't need volume, it needed vision. 27 minutes in, a complication struck. The patient's left atrial pressure spiked. Saturation dropped fast. A clamp had been misaligned. Small mistake, huge consequence. And it wasn't hers, but everyone looked at her anyway. Danielle moved without hesitation. "Suction, increase rate by 10. Reposition clamp at junction, I'll guide it." Haley hesitated. Danielle looked her dead in the eye. "Now, Haley." There it was. That old flicker. That hesitation wrapped in defiance. But this time Haley obeyed. Clamp corrected. Bleeding reduced, vitals stabilized. And Danielle didn't break rhythm. She kept the field moving. She saved the rhythm. She saved the patient. She saved the room. When the final suture was in, Danielle gave a final scan over the chest cavity. Close. The team nodded. The moment had passed. But the impact hadn't. Everyone in that OR had just seen something they wouldn't forget, and no one dared diminish it. Later that evening, as Danielle returned the patient's chart to admin, she noticed the hallway growing quieter behind her. She turned. Dr. Helena Ruiz was standing there, arms crossed, observing. "I heard about what happened in OR 4, she said. Danielle nodded. "You should have told me it was your first lead." Danielle gave a small smile. Felt like that would have changed how they acted. Ruiz's expression didn't soften, but her voice did. "They're updating the files tonight. You'll be listed as primary, permanently." A beat. "Also, I submitted your name for surgical leadership track." Danielle blinked. Ruiz held up a hand. "Don't argue, I've seen enough." Then she turned, heels clicking down the hallway, leaving Danielle alone. But not unseen. That night, Danielle sat alone in the break room. Not tired, not angry, just still. Ethan walked in a few minutes later, 2 coffees in hand. "Lead surgeon," he said, handing her one. She took it slowly. "You knew it might go sideways." He shrugged. "It didn't." Danielle exhaled. Haley froze. Again. And you didn't, Ethan said. Silence, then softly. Why did you pick me? Ethan looked at her. Because I knew you'd save them. Even the ones who never saved you. Danielle didn't speak. She just nodded. And for the first time, she let herself feel what she had refused to for years. Power, not given, but earned. Have you ever had to prove yourself in front of people waiting for you to fail? The Mercy Hill Annual Gala was never just a fundraiser. It was a power display. Executives, donors, chiefs of departments in tuxedos and evening gowns, whispers disguised as compliments, networking masked as charity. And for years, Danielle had avoided it. She didn't belong there, not in their eyes. She didn't want the stares, the small talk, the subtle scanning of her dress tag, her name badge, her skin. But this year she said yes, because this time she wasn't walking in as someone's assistant. She was walking in with the chief of surgery. The ballroom was a golden cavern, strung with chandeliers and champagne towers. Everywhere she turned, she saw faces that once ignored her in elevators, dismissed her in huddles, questioned her presence in operating rooms. And now, they were watching her walk across the floor in a deep green gown that caught the light like water. Arm in arm with Dr. Ethan Caldwell. Conversations dipped. Wine glasses hung mid-air. Someone whispered, "Is that?" Someone else replied, "She's the one who led OR4. A third voice muttered, "And she's with him?" But none of it reached Danielle. Not anymore, because her spine didn't bend. Her gaze didn't drop, and her smile wasn't for them. Ethan leaned in. "You all right?" Danielle tilted her head, voice cool. "I'm deciding which one of them I'd rather speak to first. The ones who ignored me, or the ones who tried to erase me." He laughed quietly. "Maybe start with the bar." She smiled. "Good idea." Near the back, Dr. Helena Ruiz raised a glass in Danielle's direction. Danielle returned the nod, and something passed between them. Unspoken, but real. Nearby, Priya, the young intern, beamed like she was watching a superhero in real life. Even Nina was there, standing in a small circle of administrative staff, clutching her purse a little too tightly. When her eyes met Danielle's, she didn't sneer. She didn't smirk. She looked down, and that was enough. Later in the evening, the mic was passed to Dr. Caldwell. He didn't use a speech, no notes, no preamble, just a simple statement. Excellence should never be debated. It should be recognized, regardless of background, politics, or prejudice. Tonight, I'm proud to announce that Mercy Hill's surgical mentorship program, originally piloted by our very own Danielle Brooks, will now be expanded hospital-wide. Applause. Louder than Danielle expected. Longer than she believed possible. She didn't cry. She didn't wave. She just stood, because that was enough. As the night wore down, Danielle stepped out onto the rooftop terrace. Stars spilled across the sky like someone had finally poked holes in the ceiling she'd been pressing against her whole career. Ethan joined her, silent. They stood side by side. No declarations, no music, just air. Finally, she said, "You know what's funny?" "What?" "I never needed them to like me." Ethan looked over. "No?" She shook her head. "They just needed to know I was never going to disappear." Inside, the music picked up again. Someone called Ethan's name. Danielle turned to go back in. But he reached out, gently took her hand. Not to lead, to stand beside. And that was the ending no one expected. Not fireworks, not revenge, not shouting or slamming doors. Just a woman who refused to leave the room they tried to keep her out of, and made it hers instead. If this story moved you, share it, because too many are still being told to stay quiet, be grateful. Don't make it about race. But some of us, we don't raise our voice to make a point. We raise our presence, until it can't be ignored.